I never should have taken the job. The email came on a Tuesday morning in October, buried between spam messages and overdue bills. Overnight security position, Ohio State Reformatory, $500 for one night. The money was too good to ignore, especially with my rent 3 weeks overdue and my car making sounds that promised an expensive trip to the mechanic. I'd heard of the Ohio State Reformatory, of course. Everyone in Mansfield had. The massive Gothic structure had been abandoned since the 1990s, though Hollywood had breathed new life into it as a filming location. What I didn't know, what I wish I'd never learned, was why they needed security for just one night. Why they were willing to pay so much for someone to simply walk the halls and make sure vagrants didn't break in. I should have asked more questions. The man who hired me, Mr. Garrett, was thin and pale with eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town, and he slid a manila envelope across the scarred formica table without ceremony. "Just walk the perimeter every 2 hours," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Check the main entrances. Make sure no one gets in who shouldn't be there." He paused, drumming his fingers on the table. "And whatever you do, don't go to the 3rd floor of the administration building." "Why not?" I asked, but he was already standing, leaving a $5 bill for coffee he hadn't touched. "Just don't." That should have been my first warning. The second warning came when I pulled up to the reformatory just as the sun was setting. The Gothic Revival architecture loomed against the darkening sky like something from a nightmare, all turrets and towers and windows that seemed to watch you. The place was massive, 6 tiers of cells in the main block, administration buildings, workshops, and God knows what else spreading across the grounds like a small city of the damned. I sat in my car for a full 10 minutes, engine running, trying to work up the courage to get out. The October wind howled through the bare trees, sending dead leaves skittering across the cracked asphalt like scurrying insects. The sound they made, that dry, scratching whisper, would haunt me for the rest of my life. But $500 was $500, so I grabbed my flashlight and clipboard and walked to the main entrance. The key Garrett had given me was old brass, heavy in my hand, and it turned in the lock with a grinding sound that seemed to echo through the empty corridors beyond. The door swung open with a prolonged creak that could have been pulled straight from a horror movie soundtrack. Inside, the reformatory was a cathedral of decay. My footsteps echoed off the vaulted ceilings as I made my way through the rotunda, my flashlight beam dancing across peeling paint and rusted bars. The smell hit me immediately, mold and rust and something else, something organic and wrong that made my stomach clench. I'd done overnight security before, mostly at construction sites and empty office buildings. You get used to the sounds an empty building makes at night, the settling and creaking as temperature changes. This was different. The Ohio State Reformatory didn't just settle, it seemed to breathe. My first patrol went smoothly enough. I checked the main entrances, walked the perimeter of the administration building, and made notes on my clipboard. The place was creepy as hell, sure, but nothing I couldn't handle. It wasn't until I was settling into the security office they'd set up for me in the main rotunda that things started to go wrong. It was just past 10 p.m. when I heard the first scream. It came from somewhere deep in the building, a sound of pure anguish that made my blood freeze in my veins. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, but when I tried to call it in, all I got was static. The scream came again, longer this time, trailing off into a sob that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. I should have left then. Should have walked out that front door and never looked back. Instead, I followed the sound. The main cell block stretched out before me like the nave of some hellish church. 6 tiers of cells rose into the darkness above, each one a small metal cage that had once held a human being. My flashlight beam swept across the bars, and I could swear I saw shadows moving in cells that should have been empty. The screaming had stopped, but now I could hear something else, a low murmuring, like dozens of voices whispering just below the threshold of understanding. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "Is someone there?" The whispering stopped immediately, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like being underwater. Then, from cell 7 on the 3rd tier, came the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. Clap. 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 I aimed my flashlight at the cell, but all I could see were the rusted bars and the darkness beyond. The clapping continued, methodical and mocking, until it was joined by another set of hands from a different cell. Then another. Soon the entire cell block echoed with applause, dozens of unseen hands clapping in perfect unison. I ran. Back in the security office, I tried to rationalize what I'd experienced. Old buildings make strange sounds. The wind can create acoustic tricks. Maybe there were vagrants in the building after all, playing games with the new security guard. But deep down, I knew none of those explanations fit what I'd witnessed. I spent the next hour reviewing the building plans Garrett had left me, trying to distract myself from the sounds that continued to drift through the walls. The Ohio State Reformatory had housed over 155,000 inmates during its 94 years of operation. Overcrowding, violence, suicides, the place had seen every form of human misery imaginable. If buildings could absorb the emotions of those who lived and died within their walls, this place would be saturated with despair. At midnight, it was time for my second patrol. I decided to stick to the ground floor this time, but as I made my way through the administration building, I found myself drawn to the staircase that led to the upper floors. Garrett's warning echoed in my mind, "Don't go to the third floor," but that only made me more curious about what was up there. The second floor seemed normal enough, just empty offices and meeting rooms filled with dust and debris. But as I climbed to the third floor landing, the temperature dropped noticeably. My breath came out in visible puffs, and the hair on my arms stood up as if charged with static electricity. The hallway stretched out before me, lined with doors that stood slightly ajar. At the far end, a single window let in pale moonlight that seemed to pool on the floor like spilled milk. I took a step forward, then another, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't name. That's when I heard the footsteps above me. They were slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth across what must have been an attic or fourth floor I hadn't seen on the building plans. The footsteps would walk from one end of the building to the other, pause, then return. Over and over, like a caged animal wearing a path in its enclosure. I should have left then. Should have run back downstairs and waited out the rest of my shift in the car. Instead, I opened the first door I came to. The room was small and windowless, with walls covered in what looked like scratch marks. Hundreds of them, gouged deep into the plaster as if someone had been clawing at the walls with their fingernails. In the center of the room sat a single wooden chair, and on the chair was a file folder. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, all of the same person. A thin man with hollow eyes and a prison uniform, staring directly at the camera with an expression of such pure hatred that it made me physically recoil. But it wasn't just the expression that made my blood run cold. It was the fact that in every single photograph, despite being taken years apart according to the dates stamped on them, the man looked exactly the same. Not aged, not changed, identical down to the last detail. At the bottom of the folder was a single sheet of paper with a name written in spidery handwriting, Thomas Whitman, executed 1954, Cell 7, 3rd tier, Cell 7. Where the clapping had come from. I dropped the folder and ran, but as I reached the hallway, every door I'd passed slammed shut in sequence, like dominoes falling. The sound echoed through the building like gunshots, and in the silence that followed, I heard something that made my soul shrivel in my chest. Laughter. Not the laughter of joy or amusement, but something broken and twisted, full of malice and pain. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, growing louder and more frenzied until it felt like the building itself was convulsing with mirth. I stumbled down the stairs, the laughter following me, echoing off the walls and seeming to come from every direction at once. By the time I reached the main floor, I was running at full speed, but the laughter had been joined by other sounds, screaming, sobbing, the rattle of chains, and underneath it all, that methodical clapping from Cell 7. I burst through the front door and ran to my car, fumbling with the keys as the sounds from inside the reformatory grew to a deafening crescendo. But as I started the engine, everything went silent. Not just quiet, silent. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic. Even my car engine seemed muffled, as if the sound was being absorbed by something unseen. That's when I saw him. Standing in the third floor window of the administration building was the man from the photographs. Thomas Whitman, executed in 1954, staring down at me with eyes that burned with an unholy light. His lips moved, and though I couldn't hear him through the glass and distance, I could read the words he mouthed over and over. Come back. I drove away so fast I left rubber on the pavement, but in my rearview mirror, I could see him still standing there, watching me go. It wasn't until I was halfway home that I realized the dashboard clock showed 3:17 a.m., but according to my watch, it was only 12:45. I'd lost 2.5 hours somewhere in that building. The next morning, I called Garrett to quit, but the number went straight to a disconnected message. When I tried to return the key and the remainder of my payment, I couldn't bring myself to keep money from that place. The address he'd given me turned out to be a vacant lot. I did some research at the library, trying to understand what I'd experienced. What I found made me wish I'd never taken that job. Thomas Whitman had been one of the reformatory's most notorious inmates. Convicted of murdering his wife and 3 children in 1952, he'd been sentenced to death and executed by electric chair in 1954. But according to the records, the execution had gone wrong. The first jolt of electricity hadn't killed him, and the second had caused the lights in half of Mansfield to flicker. Witnesses reported that Whitman had been laughing as they strapped him into the chair, and that he'd continued laughing even as the electricity coursed through his body. His last words, according to the warden's report, were, "I'll be back." But that wasn't the most disturbing part. According to the records, Thomas Whitman hadn't been executed in 1954, he died in his cell in 1953, found hanging from a makeshift noose made from his bedsheets. The execution records didn't match the death certificate, and no one could explain the discrepancy. It was as if Thomas Whitman had died twice, or maybe hadn't died at all. I also found records of other overnight security guards who'd worked at the reformatory over the years. Most had quit after a single night, but a few had been found wandering the grounds in a catatonic state, mumbling about clapping and laughter and a man in cell 7 who wouldn't stay dead. One guard, a man named Peterson, had disappeared entirely. His car was found in the parking lot with the engine still running, but Peterson himself was never seen again. That was in 1998, just 2 years after the reformatory had closed. I tried to put the experience behind me, to convince myself it had all been stress and suggestion and an overactive imagination. But the dream started a week later. Every night, I found myself back in that building, walking those corridors, drawn inexorably to the 3rd floor of the administration building. In the dreams, Thomas Whitman was always waiting for me, sitting in that wooden chair surrounded by claw marks, smiling with teeth that seemed too sharp and too many. "You left without finishing your shift," he would say in a voice like grinding glass. "But don't worry, I'm patient. I can wait." The dreams became more vivid, more real, until I started to dread falling asleep. I'd wake up with dirt under my fingernails and the smell of mold and decay clinging to my clothes. One morning, I found a brass key on my nightstand, the same key Garrett had given me, though I was certain I'd lost it somewhere in my panicked flight from the reformatory. That's when I knew I had to go back. I told myself it was to get closure, to prove that whatever I'd experienced had been a hallucination brought on by stress and fear. But deep down, I knew the truth. Thomas Whitman had gotten his hooks into me that night, and he wouldn't let go until I returned to finish what I'd started. The drive back to the reformatory took forever and no time at all. I found myself pulling into the parking lot without remembering most of the journey, as if I'd been sleepwalking behind the wheel. The building looked exactly as I remembered it, a Gothic nightmare silhouetted against the stormy sky. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to the front door, used the key that had mysteriously appeared on my nightstand, and stepped inside. The building was waiting for me. I could feel it the moment I crossed the threshold, a presence vast and hungry and patient, like a spider sensing vibrations in its web. The air was thick with whispers and half-heard voices, and shadows moved in my peripheral vision, always just out of sight when I turned to look. I walked through the rotunda and into the main cell block, my footsteps echoing in the darkness. The cell stretched up into the shadows above, and I could feel eyes watching me from every one of them. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear had been replaced by a terrible certainty, a knowledge that this had always been inevitable. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd tier, past cells filled with shadows that seemed to move and breathe. When I reached cell 7, the door was standing open. Inside, sitting on the narrow cot, was Thomas Whitman. He looked exactly as he had in the photographs, thin and pale with hollow eyes that burned with malevolent intelligence. He was wearing the same prison uniform, unmarked by time or decay, and when he smiled, I could see that his teeth really were too sharp and too many. "Welcome back," he said, and his voice was like the sound of coffin lids closing. "I've been waiting for you." "What do you want?" I asked, surprised by how calm my own voice sounded. His smile widened. Want? I don't want anything. I've already got everything I need. He gestured around the cell, and for the first time, I noticed the walls were covered in tally marks, thousands upon thousands of them, scratched into the stone with fingernails and improvised tools. Do you know what those are? He asked. Days. Every single day I've been trapped in this place, unable to leave, unable to die, unable to do anything but wait. Wait for what? For someone like you. Someone who would come back despite every instinct screaming at them to run. Someone who would walk willingly into my cell and give me what I need to finally be free. That's when I understood. The overnight security job, Garrett's mysterious disappearance, the other guards who'd quit or vanished, it had all been leading to this moment. Thomas Whitman hadn't been executed in 1954, and he hadn't died in his cell in 1953. He'd been caught between life and death, trapped in this place by forces I couldn't begin to understand, waiting for someone foolish enough to take his place. You can't leave, I said, backing toward the cell door. Not alone, he agreed. But with a willing replacement. He stood up, and I could see that his feet didn't quite touch the floor. The job comes with certain requirements. But don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to get used to them. Forever, in fact. I turned to run, but the cell door slammed shut before I could reach it. The key was in the lock on the outside, the same brass key that had brought me here, now sealing me in. Thomas Whitman laughed, the same broken, twisted sound I'd heard echoing through the building on my first night. As he laughed, his form began to fade, becoming translucent and then disappearing entirely. But his voice remained, growing fainter as he spoke his final words. Enjoy your stay. Don't worry about getting lonely, you'll have plenty of company soon enough. There's always another fool willing to take a job that pays too much for too little work. And then I was alone in cell 7, with only the tally marks on the walls for company. That was 3 months ago. I've been keeping track of the days myself now, scratching marks into the stone with the nail I pried from the cell wall. The building is my world now, all 6 tiers and countless rooms filled with shadows and whispers and things that might once have been human. During the day, I pace the corridors like Whitman did before me, wearing a path in the dust and debris. At night, I return to cell 7 and listen to the sounds of the other prisoners, men who died decades ago but refused to stay dead. Sometimes I hear footsteps in the administration building, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth across the 3rd floor. I know what that means. Someone else has taken the job, drawn by the promise of easy money and a single night's work. Soon they'll hear the screaming and the laughter and the methodical clapping from cell 7. Soon they'll be curious enough to climb those stairs despite every warning. And when they do, I'll be waiting for them. The job comes with certain requirements, after all. Someone has to walk the halls. Someone has to keep the other prisoners company. Someone has to be ready to explain the rules to the next person foolish enough to ignore their instincts and walk willingly into this place. I've been practicing what I'll say to them, rehearsing the words that will bind them to this place as surely as they bound me. It's not personal, it's just the way things work here. The Ohio State Reformatory never really closed, you see. It just changed management. Sometimes I wonder how long the chain stretches back, how many other guards and workers and curious visitors have found themselves trapped in these walls. But mostly I just wait and listen for the sound of footsteps on the stairs and the creak of the front door opening. Because someone always comes. Someone always takes the job. And when they do, I'll be ready to welcome them home. After all, I'm patient now. I can wait. The building taught me that much, at least. The tally marks on the wall of cell 7 now number 127. The search for the missing security guard continues, though police admit they have no leads. The Ohio State Reformatory Historical Society reports no knowledge of any overnight security positions, and no one named Garrett has ever been employed by any organization associated with the building. If you're reading this and considering taking a job that seems too good to be true, especially one involving an old building and overnight work, please remember this story. Some jobs aren't worth any amount of money. Some buildings are better left empty. And some doors should never be opened, no matter how much you're paid to hold the key. Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey. Here are a couple more videos for you to check out.